I strictly looked at performance, and I also looked at performance dating back the last 10 years. And that's important because I think sometimes people are like, yeah, my city won, 50 years ago and we were a dynasty back then. That's not incorporated. I'm like, nah, man, like there's like the San Antonio Spurs won the title in 2014 in the NBA, and that feels so long ago. Kawhi,
Yeah.
Tim Duncan. I just felt like 10 years was a good starting point. And I also, within those three pillars, regular season, postseason, and titles, I also broke it down into three different time periods. I looked at your 10-year, time span, your 3-year time span, and also your most recent season. So it's not just looking at, how well have you done in the last 10 years. It's also incorporating your last season performance, your most recent, and your last 3 years as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting too to see some of the things that go into it around population size, which we'll get into. But let's start with Charlotte. Charlotte came in last. This is no surprise at this point. We already mentioned it. Talk me through Charlotte's ranking and why they ranked last.
5 playoff appearances in 22 seasons. Think about that. Citywide over the last 10 years, the MLS team Charlotte FC, which just came into existence just a few years ago. Then you incorporate the Charlotte Hornets and the Carolina Panthers. They have no titles over the last 10 years. The Charlotte Hornets and the Panthers, with Charlotte FC, just 5 postseason appearances in 22 years. When you look at that, that ranks 23rd among all 25 cities for the lowest postseason percentage. Then you look at their regular season percentage, which is actually worse. It ranks dead last. Collectively, over the last 10 years, Charlotte as a city has a 437 win percentage, but that drops to 364 in the last 3 years, and even further in the last year. Charlotte Hornets plus the Panthers and Charlotte FC collectively have a win percentage of 287 as a city. And so when you incorporate the lack of titles, the just 5 postseason appearances out of 22, and then the collective just disaster of the regular season numbers, especially recently, Charlotte comes out last with a 2.8 major score. So it's basically out of 100. They come in at 2.8, which is by far the worst in all of the sport in all the cities. And it's just like, yeah, the Hornets have never made it to the conference finals. The Panthers, while they've done fairly well in the Cam Newton era, that's a long time ago. And so Charlotte as a city, it has been tough. They deserve these teams, but it's been rough over the last decade.
So I actually don't think Charlotte is like probably totally surprising to people given just the current state of things, right? Like 10 years is a long time ago to your point, and like you kind of forget about some of those like the Panthers Super Bowl run. Like most people outside of Charlotte forget about that already because it feels so long ago, and like the current state of sports today is just so bad that it makes a lot of sense. One of the ones that surprised me though is, right, you only ranked 25. So you have Detroit above them, who's just slightly better. They have the Lions now, so maybe that kind of makes things go a little bit better. But obviously the Pistons are no good. The Tigers are in the playoffs, but they haven't won much over the last, however many years. But the slot right above them, number 23 on the list, so they call it third worst sports city in the country, is Chicago. And Chicago is a massive sports city. I mean, they have 6 different teams: the Bears, the Bulls, the Cubs, the White Sox, the Blackhawks, and the Chicago Fire. Now, the Bears haven't been good in a while. Maybe that changes with Caleb, but the Bulls haven't been good. The Cubs won, I guess, the most recent championship in 2016, which, to your point in your article, feels like it should be worth 1,000 points rather than just what it was.
I'm a Red Sox fan, and Theo Epstein, like whatever he did in 2004, felt like a billion titles or billion World Series. So I get it. Chicago's probably like, yeah, but we beat the curse of the Billy Goat. Come on now.
Yeah, but then you have the White Sox, right? And the White Sox, I mean, historically are literally the worst team in baseball history this year. So, and that doesn't seem like it's getting any better considering the ownership group. The Blackhawks, I think, are surprising because they won 1 title in your ranking over the last 10 years. But I think most people kind of thought of them as like this dynasty of sorts where they were winning multiple times, but they haven't been good in a long time either. And then you have the Fire, right? So like for such a big city, Chicago is so far down that list. That really surprised me.
Yeah, Chicago. They have six teams. They're the worst sports city with that many teams. And I should have mentioned this up top. What is the qualifier for this? Like, how do you get to be one of the top 25 here? And what I did was I basically looked at the five big sports, MLS included, with the big four, and I wanted to draw the line at if you have three teams or more in those five leagues. And so that, like, self-interestedly, that is where the Charlotte line is. So I wanted to see, like, I was like, I want to know how bad Charlotte is compared to the rest of the
Well,
cities in
what
America.
cities would you be leaving out by doing that? Like Las Vegas? Like what else? What are we talking about here?
Yep, Las Vegas would be out. There's a few cities that don't
That have two,
qualify.
basically.
Portland is another one.
Okay.
Columbus. Some of the MLS teams that you would think, like, oh, they've had a lot of success. Well, they don't qualify in this because they don't have at least three sports teams. So, like, you're
I think
leaving
that's
out
fair. I think that's fair.
yeah, I kind of felt pretty good keeping in something like Nashville, keeping in Cincinnati. These cities have three plus in their metro area. That's another thing, is like, what do you constitute as a metro area? I looked at Wikipedia, had this really good list of major sports cities and all the teams in those metro areas with the population size. And basically, like, the Bay Area in California, Oakland, San Francisco, and San Jose, they're all incorporated into the same area, which you can quibble with Washington being included with Baltimore. I did that in this because of the DC metro area. But basically what it comes down to is what you think of as a major city in America. How do their sports teams do? And Chicago, like you said, it's so weird to think of Chicago, given the rich sports history, pop culture wise. I mean, think about the Bears with SNL, and of course you got Michael Jordan and the Bulls, and the Chicago Cubs. Even though they hadn't won a World Series, you had so much iconograph. Why am I not pronouncing that word? Iconography. That's not the right way. I don't know why I'm fumbling with that. But basically, what was the dude? Rookie of the Year, the movie Rookie of the Year.
Yeah,
There's so
yeah.
many things, and of course you got the Cubs with Ferris Bueller's Day Off. All these things that are iconic.
Part of culture,
just part of culture, but they haven't won anything in the last 10 years.
Yeah. Well, and the other interesting thing is, like, in some essence, you would think that being a big city helps you because maybe players want to play there, whatever it is. But, like, in salary cap league, it's really all comes down to money. Like, a lot of the players just want to go wherever they're going to get paid the most money. And, like, sure, Chicago maybe will be able to give you that, but it doesn't really give you a leg up unless you're the baseball team. But the baseball team, specifically the White Sox, aren't spending anything more than anyone else is spending.
Yeah.
So it's like the major city thing doesn't play a huge role in this outside of having more teams, I guess. But, like, the other thing is, if you go down that list, so you have Chicago at 23, but even the next one up, like Phoenix, that's surprising too, because if you think about the last few years, the Suns had a deep run and the Diamondbacks had a deep run also going to the World Series. Now, look, the Coyotes, they're done. They literally left town, so they don't count. And the Cardinals have had a tough run of it as of late, specifically over the last few years. But, like, to have two teams, plus, to your point, all the buzz, like Matt Ishbia going in there, buying the team, kind of flexing his muscle, the WNBA as well, hosting the All-Star game. Like, it feels like Phoenix is hotter than maybe they ended up on your list.
Yeah. So my buddy from Phoenix texted me after he saw the list, and he's like, that's brutal. If we're lower because of an MLS team, that's unfair. And I'm like, I get that argument. One thing I did do in this was I didn't weight the leagues by the size of the league. So you might argue, like, hey, a Super Bowl win should matter more to a city than an MLS, championship. And
that's fair.
And I get
that's
that.
fair.
It's a fair rebuttal. It's something I might incorporate the next time I do this. That an update or a refresh, I might consider doing, extra weight for the proportion of that team, or at least that sport. So NFL might get a little bit more weight compared to MLS. And the other thing I did that maybe I'll think about for the next round of this is give your credit for deep postseason runs. You talk about the Suns who lost to the Milwaukee Bucks a few years ago in the NBA Finals. In 2021, should you get rewarded for a finals appearance or a World Series appearance like the D-backs? And I think that might be something to consider, is giving a little bit of a bump, a little bit of a bonus for going and reaching to the final. If you win the pennant or if you win your conference, you should get a little bit of a boost. But if you look at it, Phoenix is 20th in all three categories. So their regular season win percentage, their postseason appearances, and their titles, they're ranked in the bottom six. So Phoenix definitely feels like they should be higher. That was one of my big surprises, like you said.
Yeah, and then you have Nashville at 18. So wait, let's go through the list. And even though we won't touch on all of them, I want to just say them in case someone lives in this city and they're curious where their city's at. So you had Phoenix at 22, Cincinnati at 21, Washington, Baltimore at 20. Oh, that's an interesting one because you have 7 teams there by combining them. So you have the Commanders, the Ravens, 2 NFL teams, Wizards, Nationals, and Orioles, 2 MLB teams. You have the Capitals and DC United MLS. Okay, so what's the deal? Let's go through this one because that's a huge city with so many teams that I wouldn't have expected to be that low given how many teams you gave them.
Yeah, so the Wizards just have been awful.
They're awful, yeah.
The Wiz are gonna whiz. They had Bradley Beal, the John Wall era, and it's been downhill ever since they kind of peaked and John Wall got injured. So the Wizards are really anchoring this rating here. And the Baltimore Orioles, my next door neighbor here in Charlotte, is a big Orioles fan. And I was like, yeah, DC got hit hard in this rankings because of the, but they could have been a lot worse if they didn't have the Ravens and the Orioles. And he's looking at me, he's like, man, the Orioles haven't really done anything though. They're always considered the next up and coming team, but in terms of putting it all together, they just really haven't done as well as you'd think. And so, DC with the Ravens, again, they're not getting a bump for making it to a Super Bowl or having a deep postseason run. So
they also have the Commanders next to them. So that's like, with Dan Snyder, that automatically deducts a few points.
Exactly. They're the Wizards of the football, or which one is it? My DC buddies who always text me about just how awful their sports teams are. They nodded along as they saw this. Rounding out the bottom 6, so 20th is Washington and Baltimore as a metro area. Then there's Cincinnati, Phoenix, Chicago, Detroit, Charlotte. Really, if you're going to tier this out, I think Detroit and Charlotte are just in the bottom tier. Those two, cities have had a really rough go of it. And then kind of those Washington, Baltimore, Cincinnati, Phoenix, they kind of bunch up together. But really, the next tier around like the halfway point, there's a lot of just a lot of teams that are on top, and congestion of teams that are not quite bad, but just kind of in the middle.
Okay, so that's 20. We'll call it, the bottom of the list essentially from a tier perspective. Now we're moving up a little bit, if you want to call it that. Minneapolis, St. Paul is 19. With no titles over the last 10 years, but 7th out of 25 in regular season score. Vikings, Timberwolves, Twins, Wild, and Minnesota United in MLS. And then you have 18 is Nashville. That surprised me a little bit. Is it because of hockey or MLS?
Yeah, it's not because of the football team. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I was running through my head. I'm like, it's not the Titans.
Yeah, they're helped by kind of, and this is the argument my buddy was saying is like, should your MLS team get the same amount of weight as the NFL team? And I hear that they're getting a bump from that. So I think when you look at Nashville, it's a city that I think a lot of people clump in together with Charlotte, where they're like, it's an up and coming city. A lot of young professionals are moving there, a lot of excitement. And they deserve more. Some people think they deserve an NBA team. Some people think they deserve.
I wrote about that the other day. I wrote about NBA expansion, and I got like 5 emails back of people saying, "What about Nashville?" And I kind of just discounted it a little bit, and I was shocked at how many people were interested in them getting expansion teams.
Yeah, and here they do okay. They're not great. Their major rating is 32, so they're not above average here. But in terms of the Predators and Nashville FC, they're much better than some of the other teams on this list. And given their size, they do fairly well. So given how their population ranks among all of the teams, they're probably punching above their weight. Whereas a city like Charlotte, which has a similar population size, just has not been able to carry their weight.
Yeah. Okay. So that's Nashville at 18. Then we have St. Louis at 17, which is, debatable whether you want to call that a surprise or not. I would argue it is because the Rams left there in
Mm-hmm.
2016. So they only have MLB, NHL, and MLS now. And the Cardinals, like I always saw that, I think people see the Cardinals as like almost like the Pittsburgh Steelers of baseball, where like they're just like always good to make the playoffs, and they haven't really been that good over the last decade relative to what they were the decade before winning the World Series. So like that surprises me a little bit. But then you have Cleveland at 16. So right above St. Louis, you have Cleveland. And I'm
Yep.
assuming Cleveland ranked so high because of, yeah, the Cavs was in 2016, right? The title with LeBron.
Yep, that counts. And remember, since it was in 2016, it's not within the last 3 years, and it's not in the last year. So when I do that like time period weighting system, where all those three time periods, last 10 years, last 3 years, and last year, if you win a title, if you're the Boston Celtics and you win last year in the finals, you're getting triple the points there. But
Yeah.
if you win a title in 2016, it's not carrying as much weight in this system. And when you look at it, like the Guardians are much better, I think, this year, but they just don't have the titles to compete with some of the other teams. This guy I played golf with a few days ago, he's like, he's a big Pittsburgh guy, and he's like, why don't we have an NBA team? The Cleveland has an NBA team, and they couldn't win a title for 3 decades or whatever it was. There was a huge drought in Cleveland, and I understood because Pittsburgh as a city has supported its teams through thick and thin, and they've done really well compared to Cleveland. And this study points to Pittsburgh at 10 compared to Cleveland at 16. So I can understand Pittsburgh fans clamoring for a black and yellow NBA team, just like there are other three teams.
Yeah, that was another city where people responded and said Pittsburgh deserves one, which to your point, I get. They support their teams. If you look at the Penguins, I think when they got purchased a few years ago by Fenway Sports Group, I remember reading a stat at the time where like they hadn't had below like 95% attendance in like more than a decade, even when the team was terrible, right? So like to your point, they show up. My thing is specifically with the NBA, like, would you rather go to a market like Las Vegas and Seattle, even if you have to rearrange the divisions and conferences a little bit, where they don't already have three or four major
Oh, yeah.
sports teams versus a Pittsburgh? And like, I think we all know that's kind of leaning that way, but it's a fair
Yeah.
argument to be had of like, what is more important in existing sports culture or people who are clamoring for a professional sports team?
Well, Joe, there's another angle to this, which is like the NBA in terms of attracting star talent is much different than in football, right? So, like in football, one player can only do so much. That
Yeah.
one player can't play defense and offense. There's no Otani that is in football, whereas in basketball, one guy getting one stud can make or break your franchise. And how is Pittsburgh going to attract that star? It's
Mhm.
not. No one's going to be. LeBron James isn't going to be picking up and moving to Cleveland unless he's from Cleveland, And so that's the same thing with Pittsburgh. I think Jeff Capel over at Pitt has done a great job with the program, given the talent that they have. But it's really hard to compete in the ACC and in the NBA from a basketball perspective when your city just doesn't have the same sort of association with star power or the marquee market. So I get it. With a city so steeped in tradition and culture with their sports teams, they probably deserve an NBA team based on that, but not based on can they attract a star talent over a market like Las Vegas. I think NBA players are going to Las Vegas
Yeah.
100 times out of 100 compared to Pittsburgh.
Yeah. Same money, equal money, you're going to Vegas for
That's
sure.
right.